Okay, so we're going to open up the floor to questions. Can I just ask that you can maybe stand up so we can get you on camera? Can you say the name of who you're directing the question to? And can I ask you to try not to make statements, but to actually just ask a question, because we want to give as many people as possible an opportunity to put questions to the panel.
Okay.
Can I just put this question to Susan? Basically, yeah, you said, and Max covered it already, and you've covered it, how far you've come from statements you made some 20 odd years ago. Can I ask a couple of things? One is, what is it that changed your mind? Because you've come quite a long way from essentially saying, and I don't want to embarrass you here, but from essentially saying that homosexuality was bizarre and unnatural, to saying that homosexuals should actually have legal protection for their relationships. So that's a huge turnaround, and I congratulate you, and I'm sure everyone else will, on making that and coming so far along that road. What was it that changed your mind, and what would it take to get you just that little bit further?
Do I start? Yes. Well, I think the answer to your question is sheer and utter ignorance on my part. And I would hazard a guess, you're quite young, but I would hazard a guess that possibly 25 years ago you might have held some opinions that you don't hold now. And for certain, because I'm a teacher, most of my 19, 20-year-old students are absolute die-hard Marxist socialists, and I'm sure if I was to meet them 25 years' time, they'd probably be captains of industry and capitalists. So it was an ignorant remark, but you have to remember that we're all victims of the time set that we're in. So we're socialised into understanding or believing or being aware of, and we just have to go on progressing. So you're saying to me, what would have to happen for me to say that marriage should be a word that's redefined? And I can't see how you could make it mean anything other than it is the word marriage. So I would have no, as I've said subsequently many times, I changed pretty quickly, and by 2010, civil partnership, I was completely for it. Perhaps you can understand that. And I've always said if there are any more details to be added, let's add them. But I cannot ever move away from the fact that the institution of marriage means something that is intrinsically for the creation of children. So I can't ever change my opinion that a child, for the first choice, I mean, we talked about the pinnacle. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I'll never, ever budge from the fact that a child blossoms with a mother and a father. That's my opinion. You've asked me. I cannot make that move. I just can't.
Also for Susan, my name is Astrid. Very much yes. So you keep talking about the children, which is technically not part of this debate, as Brendan pointed out so nicely. We're not voting on children, we're voting on marriage. But let's talk about children. 1.5 questions, so to speak. I was walking up here from Carew's car park. I was coming up Marlborough Street. There was a family there, nice heterosexual family. Mommy, daddy, toddler and buggy. They were homeless, huddled into a corner. Both parents were clearly junkies. Are you trying to tell me that this child will be better off in life than a child raised in a stable gay household? And the second question I have for you, what about the children who are already growing up in rainbow families, in stable, happy rainbow families? These children won't stop existing because you refuse to acknowledge them. By voting no, by campaigning for no, you are taking security away from these children. What is supposed to happen to these kids? Can you tell me?
Well, you just gave an example of children that weren't secure. So I'm not changing anything by voting no. I'm keeping the status quo. I'm saying that in society, it is my view that if you take an overall position, of, which in my case I think that a person is better reared by a mother and a father, I can't budge from that because that's what I believe, but I totally accept what you're saying. There's thousands of people, thousands of children that are reared in a single home and do very well, or reared by two people of the same sex and do very well. But this referendum is life-changing because it's altering society. It's turning society on its head. It's not a question of saying, let's pick up the problem people, which is what a lot of us in this room do for our work. But I can't move from the fact that there should be an ideal in society, which for me is a child being reared by a mother and father. And I have to explain one more time, this referendum has got everything to do with children because it says in the Constitution that the family is based on marriage. That's what it says. Read it, Article 41(1)(3). It says that the family is based on marriage. So if marriage now means something completely different, but it can still beget a family, albeit by the methods that we talked about, then if children aren't part of a family, perhaps you tell me what they are.
You didn't actually answer my question. I think that's quite systematic.
We'll take another question. We take one more for Susan, because and then maybe if anyone has a question for anyone else on the panel.
Sorry, Susan, you're getting this time. Susan, I was just very interested in what you said about being disgusted by your own position 25 years ago, what you said about gay people. And that's a very brave admission. Do you think, now that the sky didn't fall down, since homosexuality was decriminalised, society hasn't collapsed, we didn't have all the ills that were predicted at the time, the dire ills, the changing society, do you think in 25 years' time you'll be disgusted at your position on marriage equality now, when the sky doesn't fall down, when society doesn't collapse, when gay people get married and raise happy children? Do you think you'll be disgusted at your thoughts now?
No, I don't. I don't, because I think what I'm saying is so much more basic than my opinion. What you've got to remember is that when I wrote what now disgusts me, it didn't disgust anybody at the time. There wasn't one single response in the Irish Times. It was what every government minister, every government activist was saying. It wasn't anything, by the way, it wasn't a personal thing. It was just that we generally thought that the 1861 law should remain intact. And I totally agreed. And so did, you could go around and find every single similar letters from every single main party, in particular Fianna Fáil, let me add. And I was a public representative with a public body behind me, and that's what I thought, and I changed. But if you're saying, am I going to look back and say, wow, you were so ungenerous, so unfair? I'm not, but I could almost say to you, do you think there could be any way in which we can't foresee what the next 20 years might bring if this is a yes? It could be that in 20 years' time, there aren't any marriages anyway. There's no gender. Would you think that could happen?
Have we a question not for Susan?
No.
I have one for...
Sorry, great, Susan.
Give us a break.
I do have a couple for Susan too, but I really enjoyed, actually really enjoyed your, I'm a yes, very discreet yes there. And I really enjoyed what you had to say, and a lot of what you have to say makes sense. A lot of what you have to say around surrogacy makes sense. I just happen to think it's relevant to the current debate because it applies both to heterosexual and homosexual couples, marriages, etc. My question is, you also make a valid point about there being no human right to marriage in the convention. However, I would be very interested in your comments with regard to the more fundamental human right to equal treatment, equal rights for all citizens, irrespective of their gender or their sexual orientation. Because to treat an individual different on the grounds of their gender or their sexual orientation in any matter that is a part of the Constitution or any matter that is a civil right is to discriminate. And within, I'm new to all this whole area, but as far as I understand it, we are just looking for equality for a civil right. And that to me is, that's where the fundamental human right comes from.
I think this is a very key point. There's been a lot of talk so far in the whole national debate. The word equality is thrown out. Equality and identical are two different words. There are 6 headings relevant to marriage. 3 are outlawed by the UN Declaration of December 48 as grounds for restriction in regard to marriage. Restriction in terms of race, religion and nationality. There are 3 other elements of restriction applicable to marriage. Age. You discriminate on grounds of age when you have any age limit in regard to marriage. Is it relevant? That's a matter for debate, how exactly you fix an age limit for marriage in any society at any time. Secondly, relationship. Incest is only one form of restriction applied generally, and there are varying restrictions in varying countries on how close relationships may be to qualify for marriage. Thirdly, gender. Gender has been the universal discrimination exclusion in regard to marriage. That is why it is not even mentioned in the Irish Constitution or the European Convention of 1950 or the Universal Declaration of the UN in 1948. Identical and equal are different words, and if you don't allow the idea of there being relevant distinctions, then you are engaged in a total, complete confusion. Distinction does not mean discrimination when there's a valid basis for the distinction. And the valid distinction in regard to age, in regard to relationship and gender have applied in all societies and in all states today in regard to marriage. So there's a total confusion of equal and identical involved here.
But that's not the question. That just talked about the human right to marriage. I asked about the...
Use the microphone.
Sorry, that's exactly the question I didn't ask. Okay, that's exactly the argument that you put forward. I said, taking that aside, accepting your argument, let's go back to the more fundamental principles of human rights. That you cannot, everybody is entitled to equal rights and equal treatment under the law, irrespective of sex or sexual gender or sexual orientation. And this is a civil right.
Everybody is entitled to avoidance of discrimination under a whole series of headings which have been enumerated in Ireland in recent years in the relevant legislation.
Principle.
Sorry, the Irish state has recognised discrimination as being illegal under a whole series of headings, right? The Irish state, for example, bans discrimination in terms of marital status, in terms of gender. Gender...
And sexual orientation.
Yeah, and gender is mentioned in the Irish Constitution. You do not remove gender as a reality or as a constitutional category when you provide there should be no illegitimate discrimination. Discrimination in terms of employment, for example, has been a key area, and payment for employment has been a key area. That's been dealt with. But the idea that you have no discrimination, you have no differentiation rather, that any differentiation is discrimination is completely incoherent. There is differentiation in gender in the Irish Constitution and in the Irish law. If you say there shouldn't be or there isn't, what you're saying is male and female don't exist.
No, didn't say that.
Well, that's the logic of that position.
I would like to take that up, if I may. I think operating here is an assumption about gender that does not map, in my view, onto the real world. We have this, I think I'm right in saying, Tom, that you believe that there are 2 genders, they are fixed and they are different, yes?
Yes.
Well, that flies in the face of rather a lot of evidence that we have now. I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term intersex.
And what percentage?
Well, according to a recent BBC documentary, they say some variation of intersex condition is at the same frequency of the population as twins or redheads. So this is not a marginal thing, and it does not apply to medical oddities, which is what an awful lot of people who are wedded to the idea of 2 fixed genders who are distinct would like to suggest. This is rather prevalent, and it can take the form of anything from somebody who has 2 X chromosomes and a Y. It could take the form of somebody who identifies with a gender that they were not assigned at birth. It can take the form of somebody whose chromosomes and physical appearance are opposite ends of the spectrum, and their identity may be another variable as well. We are constrained now by a legal system that is predicated on the assumption that we have 2 fixed, distinct genders, and this is just not supported by the evidence. And furthermore, an adherence to this particular perspective on the world is causing a great amount of misery, which could be alleviated. Now, I do not wish to abolish the concepts of men or women. I do not wish to abolish the idea of gender. What I do want is an idea of gender that reflects both the lived realities of the citizens of this country and the world, and is also congruent with the evidence that we have about this world. And Well, I'm fascinated by your adherence to the idea that anybody who creates a child should be responsible for it.
You're fascinated.
I'm fascinated, and I think it's a noble one. And having been raised by a single parent myself, with a father who was absent from a fairly early age, I can say that it has resonance for me. However, what I would also say to that as well, both you and Susan have a revulsion for surrogacy, and it will always be painted in the light of consumerist Westerners renting the womb of some downtrodden Indian woman. And I raised the issue of altruistic surrogacy, and you were saying sperm and egg, and that you have to follow the responsibility. Well, in that particular instance, the lady who carried the pregnancy did not contribute any genetic material. So there was nobody running away from anything there. And it is the case that the vast majority of this assisted human reproduction that goes on in the world is for heterosexual people. And from my perspective, again, as somebody who was mostly raised by a single parent, it is the quality of love, attention, nurturing, and mentoring that were far more instrumental in my happiness or lack thereof than the genitalia or the chromosomes of the people from which it came. And I think that it is a complete misframing of human happiness and welfare to suggest that that is what lies at the root of human happiness, of success of a society, instead of, in fact, what is at the root of human happiness and success of a society, which is love, compassion, altruism, education, and all of the other components that combine to make a peaceful, stable, progressive society, not the genitalia of caregivers.
Brendan. Jeff has a question for Brendan.
Hi Brendan, I just want to thank you so much for a very interesting speech, and I also want to try that again while holding the microphone in the right position. I really loved hearing your voice on this, and it's a voice I've heard from Catholics I've met while canvassing for a yes vote door to door. My question is, why don't we hear this voice in media? Why do you think that we exclusively get some self-appointed representatives of your faith rather than someone like you who's, to me, representing the majority position?
Yes, that is a difficulty. I know several priests who will vote yes. Two of them have publicly written in the Irish Times supporting that. Both of them are now in trouble with their bishops, but they knew that beforehand. And obviously this type of taboo obedience and a great fear, especially among priests. They're afraid to come out, and some people say it's a very high percentage of priests who are gay, and there seems to be no doubt whatsoever in that. And whether they have gay relationships I'm not aware of, but whether they do or don't, they are still in great fear of vote, and hopefully they will vote yes, in a secret ballot. But the vast majority, I think, of Catholics ordinarily we came out, and I wrote an article in the Irish Times twice supporting our position and encouraging and just saying that what are church people to come out. But it's a difficult one because we have lived under two popes of the past generation, and anyone who actually dissented on very trivial points were severely reprimanded and lost jobs and were sacked from seminaries. 5 priests in Ireland are still silenced, and it's a disgrace, it's an injustice, and we at the moment are putting together a charter of human rights applicable to the Catholic Church, because there are no that is the great anomaly. They preach about human rights for people outside, but within the church there are none. And that is why it is very important. Most young people, probably like yourself, have said, no, there's no chance. And my children say, Dad, you're wasting your time. You'll never change that structure. They'll destroy you in the end. But it is just a feeling that we say is, I'm not going to be pushed out of this place, because and it's a bullying situation. They have the power. But it is changing, And if enough people get together, like the gay community, they have got together over the last 30 years and have fought and have brought this to a massive conclusion. So I think black people in the United States were the same. So all through the world, we have to have hope. We get together, we unite, we work together, and that will bring about, we hope, a just solution. And we are moving ahead. And whether bishops or priests, but I think I have good hope for the Catholic Church, that it will be and needs radical reform within. But at the same time, you know, it needs brave people to stand up. But that's the way it is. Thank you.
My question is both for Ms. Phillips and Mr. Carew, and it's a follow-on from Max in terms of gender. 29 years ago, I married a man that I loved. I married him in the Catholic Church, and we swore vows to each other that we'd love each other to the end of time. During the 29 years since, we've had a beautiful daughter. She's now nearly 20. And also during those 29 years, we have also discovered through those years that my partner, the person I love, is female. She has gone through surgery. She went through years of transition. We had a lot of difficulties, but our marriage has survived. From the age of 10, my daughter has accepted she has two mums, not a mum and a dad. Where she's with her biological parents, but she's had to adapt, and we've had to adapt. And we have come out, and she calls us her two mums. She introduces her family to her two mums. She talks about her two mums. She advises the mums on their handbags and their makeup. She is with us the whole time. She's a generous person. She's in Trinity College. She was also accepted to Oxford but couldn't take up Oxford. She has come out of this whole situation as a very mature, very understanding and very pro-marriage equality person, and she's campaigning on that. And I am saying to you, both of you, life is not binary. Life is not male and female. Life is different from what you hope. And what I hope is that on the 22nd of May, because it will personally affect us, that we vote yes. Because under the present government, they are formulating the Gender Recognition Act. And under that act, a transgender person can get their gender recognition certificate. We won't be able to. Because to do so, we would have to divorce. 29 years of pain and struggle to acceptance and love, and we would have to, by this government, divorce if we don't pass this bill. And we have gone through too much, and I'm not accepting that. And I'm pounding on doors, and I'm talking here now. And I will tell you, I'm fighting every step of the way, not just for ourselves, but for every gay and lesbian person in this country.
Tom, do you want to respond? Yeah, if you want.
Yeah. But basically, policy making in a constitution is not about every individual case and every individual possibility.
It's about the people of Ireland.
Yes.
It is not about imagining every possibility and giving equal status to every possibility. And the argument I make fundamentally is that the responsibility for the life you create is one you can never transfer. If you take that position, that to me is the fundamental issue. I don't care whether people enter into a marriage registration process or not. The reality of a commitment has nothing to do with whether they register it or do not register it. It's a human reality, a living reality. It's a relationship first, with or without a state registration or religious ceremony of any sort. That is the fundamental reality. And marriage and relationship is key. Some relationships, most relationships, end up producing children, and it is the welfare of children and status of children that is the key issue. not individual circumstances of infinite variety. And I fundamentally do not accept that you can simply say everything is binary and there are no distinctions. There are distinctions. Not everything is absolutely interchangeable and in total flux. That's an ideological position of a very fringe ideological character. And the BBC documentary is not, to me, the source of all wisdom.
Sorry, scientific fact. Sorry.
Can I?
I feel I do need to briefly respond to that. I think that to flip the script and to say that it is we who are ideological is a perverse analysis in this situation. What we care about here is human flourishing and human well-being. We believe that the laws as they currently stand are not conducive to best human flourishing and human well-being. At best, you have made a tenuous case that disrupting tradition might have unforeseen consequences. What all of the evidence shows, both on issues such as gender and on issues such as child rearing and marriage, is that it is the quality of the interactions, the quality of the care, and the quality of the love that are the key drivers of child welfare and human flourishing. And I have to say that implicit in what you have said, Tom, is that adoptive families are somehow less than biological families. And you did, in fact, in your opening remarks, say a family cannot be founded without the ability to create children. Well, I think that I wrote it down as you said it. Well, YouTube will be able to tell us when we go back and look over it. I will leave it to viewers to decide. However, implicit in all else that you've said is that adoptive families, because of this sundering of the responsibility of the creator of the child to raise the child, is somehow a malformation of family. And I don't think that anybody here accepts that. I said implicit in what you said.
Let me speak for myself, please.
Certainly.
I don't like words being put into my mouth, especially words of that nature. If you create life, you are responsible. If an adoptive situation arises, or for example, if parents are killed in a car crash and the grandmother takes over and rears the child, an excellent effort may be made, an excellent result may happen. It does not mean the child has not been deprived of something very fundamental, whether it's in a situation of adoption or, for example, in the case of death of one or both parents. You either believe that parents have a duty and that children have a right, an absolute inherent right, to both know who their parents are. Ask people who are adopted, why is it so vital for them? Sometimes it becomes vital in their teens, sometimes later. Why so many tell stories of how vital it is to find out the full story? I don't think I'm imagining this. I don't think people have always lied to me who've spoken of this personally. People have spoken publicly about it. The second thing is that in addition to the right to know, you have as a child a right, a strict right, in relation to the parents who conceived you, that they take responsibility for what they have done and that they be present to discharge the responsibility they freely enter into. That is the core issue. The issue of welfare may be dealt with. The grandmother may do a wonderful job. It does not mean that the parents have a right to abandon the kid and dump the kid on the grandparent. It doesn't mean that nothing is lost. And there's a total confusion going on here. The issue is not about measuring results and talking about any result therefore may be achieved under certain circumstances. It doesn't mean that therefore any circumstance, any structure has no value. The structure which comes from human responsibility, this is not about religion, it's about personal responsibility. The structure of that is one nobody can transfer and walk away from, and that to me is key, and it is not invalidated by the fact that in emergency situations, in a marginal number of cases, a solution may be found out, which still does not remove...
250,000 single-parent families are in marginal situations or exceptions.
Okay, so we're actually going to take another question. Okay, Kevin, you have a question there.
Can I contribute to the lady who spoke about gender? I would urge everyone in this room to look up a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. I'm a carrier of that particular condition. My daughter is a recipient of that because her mother and I are both carriers. She has the full-blown disease. She was declared a boy at birth. And I would say to every single person in this room, your idea of your gender needs an awful lot of examination. Look at the condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and you might have some understanding of what you're talking about, but you don't at the moment.
Just for my point of view, I totally know what you're saying, I totally believe what you're saying, and it isn't part of what I was discussing. What I've tried to discuss all along is not gender in the sense of areas which cross over, which that condition is. I'm talking about gender for somebody who says they're a man or says they're always happy to be. I'm just concerned when it gets wiped out and there's no gender. That's what I have a problem with.
You need to read it. You need to read it.
I just want to make one last point. Tom, it really does seem to me that your reasoning is backwards, because what you are in effect arguing is that because you have such a conviction of the obligation on a creating parent to nurture and protect their child, that you are therefore going to oppose a change in the Constitution that would afford the status of family to children who are not being raised in that thing. So you're saying that it is a misfortune or a withdrawal of a right from a child that they not be raised by their biological parents, and on top of that you're going to compound it and withhold the definition of family from those that are in that situation. So it seems to me your prescription for the misfortune, as you describe it, of these children is to compound it by making sure that they stay outside the constitutional definition of a family.
That is totally illogical. I don't think Max really accepts the fundamental starting point which I come from, and this is a fundamental difference. Call it ideological, call it ethical, whatever you like. I've made my point, I think, quite clearly. If you take the example where there's no choice involved, two parents are killed in a car crash. The grandmother is left with one or more children to rear. Grandmother carries that out. Nothing in any constitution, no words, no acts, can remove the horror of what happened, and the double horror. The horror of the death of the parents and the horror of children deprived of those whose responsibility and right it is to care for those children. The excellent effort that may be made by the grandmother who deals with that, who is not making a voluntary decision to be a replacement, a substitute, a proxy parent, but who is forced by such circumstances, by such tragedy. Nothing removes the fact that it is making the best of what is also a tragedy in the first place. And I think the fundamental perspective which Max has is an ideologically driven one, which simply does not recognise that reality.
So there's a question down here.
Yeah, just a question to the side in favour of the motion. Sometimes in these debates it's kind of difficult to know what the underlying reason or premise for the argument made. So in terms of same-sex marriage and your opposition to it, I'm wondering, is that in principle objection to it, or is it really down to parenting? So say, for example, if you use a thought experiment, say we actually decided, okay, the referendum is for same-sex marriage, but we're going to eliminate parenting or technological reproduction, anything like that. Would you have a problem still with gay and lesbian marriage? And if I may ask the opposite side briefly, if I may. Say, for example, with civil partnership, I think one of the speakers mentioned that if civil partnership, if recipients of that received the same legal rights as, say, civil marriage couples, what is the problem with that, say? So, for example, you could argue that both have, acquired the same legal rights, and it's just all in name. So, arguably down the road. So, arguably down the road, you could say, well, we have two definitions, but pretty much they're acquire the same social status. So, I'm wondering what your response to that.
I would almost turn around what you said and say to you, what is your problem with civil partnership? Why don't you find that is, if it has proper legal right, what's the problem with civil partnership? I'm really going to ask you that question. I didn't see why I have to answer them all. You tell me that.
Well, I did ask the other side.
No, he was asking you. Asking you if you got rid of surrogacy and assumed assisted reproduction, would you be okay with same-sex marriage?
The problem here is that you're trying to ask me a hypothetical question, because I've said from the very start, because it's the constitutional angle which I've tried to put over, that if we change this, because of the wording and because of the article that's already there, this is about children. So you can't say to me, well, we'll cut it in half. We can't cut it in half. And I would like to I don't know whether this is the last time I'll get in, but just in case it is. I mean, one of somebody I respect tremendously, because I've had I've had dealings in a completely different sphere with him, is one of the members of the gay community, Leo Varadkar, and this is what he said, and I'm sorry, it'll annoy you terribly. He said in 2010, I agree it wasn't 25 years ago like my misdemeanors, but it wasn't very long ago. He said in Dáil Éireann, and I heard it, he said, every child has the right to a mother and father, and as much as is possible, the state should vindicate that right. So he said that. He said that's much more important than the right of 2 men or 2 women to have a family. So what could you say about that even? I'm sure Max will say something.
Well, he evolved, as have you.
No, but he's a bit sooner.
Just on the point of the civil partnership, I think.
Answer me that.
Yes, I would not be in favour of a civil partnership, even if it included every last jot and tittle of rights that are in marriage. I mean, I think, again, operating underneath this discussion is a mindset that views homosexuality as a set of sexual behaviours. And in the words of the late great Christopher Hitchens, homosexuality isn't just a form of sexual behaviour, it's a form of love, and it deserves our respect for that reason. And the impulse to romantically pair bond runs fairly deep in our species. Our nearest genetic relatives, the chimpanzees, are far more polyamorous than we are. Our other closest relatives, though not as close to the chimpanzees, are the gorillas, and they have a polygamous society with a dominant male and many females. We sit in between the two. We're fairly polyamorous, but we also have a very, very deep impulse to romantically pair bond. And I would suggest that even in child procreation and rearing, were not a feature of that would exist anyway. And I do not think that a society where my relationship must sit at the back of the bus and have a different name is one that benefits anybody in this country, whether they're gay or straight, lesbian or bisexual, whether they're transgender or cisgender or intersex. I think that people's romantic love for other people should be on an equivalent footing, both semantically and legally. And I would be against civil partnership on that basis.
So we're and I'm just very aware of the time, so if we take you as the last question after yourself then.
Thanks. My name's Alan. I'm not affiliated, but I am a gay man. I'm also a twin. And I just want to say to Tom that if this does pass on the 23rd of May, the only thing that will change is that my sister will be able to marry her boyfriend and I'll be able to marry mine. And that's the only thing that's ever going to change with a positive vote. Also, to say, Tom, that you were given a background that you were a trade unionist, I just want to know, how do you feel about ICTU coming out in favour and advocating a yes vote, and how you feel that fits into what a trade unionist would feel in terms of egalitarian and having an equal society? Because I'm hearing that you are a trade unionist, but I don't see where your trade union background fits into your particular argument. And then just at one point for Susan, you mentioned in relation to a granddad marrying his grandson for inheritance rights, and I just want to ask how you actually read what the amendment will be, because it's an act by 2 persons in accordance with law, and a grandmother can marry their grandchild currently, and that still will remain. I think it was a bit of an outrageous statement, and you have said that you were offended by Max and his reference to you indirectly and for the Magdalene laundries, and I'm deeply offended that you would equate me marrying my boyfriend in any sort of way to a granddad marrying their grandson.
Absolutely.
If I can just very quickly respond to that. Once this referendum, if this referendum goes through, it is enshrined under the Constitution that a family is based on marriage. So it can go after that, and you must know this. A law is subservient to the Constitution, you know that. So in the future, there is nothing to stop the Oireachtas bringing in a law to say, actually, from now on, if it's real love, we're not going to put any impediments on who marries who, because it would fit under this constitution if this article is added.
Yes, but also, I mean, the government, there's nothing stopping the government from passing a law saying llamas are hedgehogs and the planes must fly underwater henceforth. So to suggest well, there's nothing in the Constitution that forbids them passing a law saying that. I mean, I think that's a really fatuous argument to suggest that somehow Pandora's box is opened and people are going to marry their close relatives for inheritance is derisory and beneath you, because I think you've made better arguments here this evening.
The response of Max to the previous question was, I think, very revealing. If every tittle and iota of civil partnership were identically aligned with everything provided in civil marriage, he's still objecting to it. That is, to me, a key ideological position, not based on rights, not based on evidence, but purely ideological. And purely, absolutely ideological. And I would absolutely be totally in favour of civil partnership or civil marriage, provided the Constitution, and I would prefer the Constitution rather than just law which can be changed, Constitution dealt with, which it never has, the issues of artificial insemination and surrogacy and so on, which to me are key issues. If they are dealt with, then the risks which I've outlined and the objections would be removed, and then the issue of relationship would be separate and clear, and family responsibilities would be identically dealt with on their own terms. There's a confusion at the moment, and that has been caused by this campaign, and that needs to be dealt with.
Can I just say that civil partnership is not protected by the Constitution, and that is the essential difference between civil relationship and marriage.
It could be.
At the moment, marriage is. It's not defined actually in the Constitution.
Sorry,
it's not defined as between a man and a woman. Hold on, yes. It doesn't say.
Every law has to fit into
Susan,
the Constitution.
it doesn't say marriage
say.
is between a man and a woman. Isn't that correct?
No, it doesn't say that.
It does actually in the Civil Registration Act 2004. It was inserted in there. It never existed.
So I'll just leave it as that. That the difference between. That is why I do not accept civil partnership as an answer. It is not protected by the Constitution as heterosexual marriage is. So
it
therefore,
could be.
Until we vote yes.
The family has special status.
Yes, the family.
And it's the family under the Constitution that's special
Not
status,
marriage.
and a family with or without children. So civil partnership is insufficient because it does not afford family status to a union, irrespective of whether there's children or not. So it is inequitable. So
One last. Just a quick question both to Susan and Tom, if I may. Let's pretend for a second this is something to do with surrogacy or the rights of children. You've touched on the rights of children to a mother and a father. Initially it was touched on by Susan, where she completely disingenuously and obtusely said that the Charter for Human Rights says that a child has a right to a mother and father. That is incorrect. A child has a right to know their mother and father, to be aware of who they are and to have contact with them. That is what it suggests, okay? Secondly, Tom kind of clarified it and said that. I'd like to ask, anywhere in our Constitution or in our law or in any European or world law does it state that a child has a right to be raised by their mother and by their father? And if that is the case, then why are children who lose parents or who are abandoned by parents, why are there, is the state not obliged to provide a parent?
Tom, do you want to take up for a second, Susan?
I can answer that.
It doesn't say it anywhere. I've been through the ball. It doesn't say it anywhere. I've gone through the European Convention. I've been reading the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I can't find it there either. I was going to ask a question, but there were so many questions coming from the floor. It's not in the ICCPR. It's not in the ICESCR. It's not in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's not in the European Convention of Human Rights. It just isn't there. And human rights evolve. That's what happened. Well, we were part of ratifying and bringing forward the European Convention of Human Rights. And there's an article in that says that everybody shall be free from cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment. And we pushed for the European Convention on Human Rights. And at the time, we had industrial schools, and they were cruel and inhuman. And we evolved. We've realised at this stage that those places were cruel and inhuman. And that's what human rights, that's where that comes from. So I can answer that, it's not there.
Hi, I'm Tony O'Brien. I'm in a minority here. I think I'm the only one who would be on the no side. I haven't heard a single question not addressed to Susan and Tom. I want to say one thing.
That was asked to Brendan because I specifically asked.
All right. Okay, the majority. I have to say that I am shocked beyond belief that there seems to be not a single person in this room, other than perhaps Tom and Susan, who is prepared to say unequivocally that a child has a right to its own mother and father, to be raised by its own mother and father. Everyone on the yes side wants to deny that right. And I find it... Okay, so we all now agree. I'm delighted to hear that we agree that a child has a right to its own mother and father, wherever possible.
What do you mean by a right?
I mean, it has an intrinsic right to be raised by its own mother and father wherever possible. Sometimes it's not possible.
Wherever possible or wherever in the best interest of the child?
No, wherever possible.
So the junkies that ask for child, they can raise the child, they just can't raise it well. Is it,
wherever possible, I would say that's not okay. Wherever possible without abuse to the child and so forth. Sometimes you can't, because of abuse, because of abandonment. But you see what I'm hearing? Everybody wants to deny the basic fundamental right. That's why you're all arguing with me. You do.
Nobody said that.
All right, put your hand up if you think every child has a right to be raised by its own mother and father whenever possible.
I'm just saying that these junkie parents, that child of these junkie parents.
I'm not counting many hands, and I think you're making a point. I want to say one other thing, and it is slightly off the subject.
Be quick, please.
Yeah, and I'm going to address it to Brendan Butler. He raised the subject of Catholicism and so forth. I didn't realise this was going to be part of the discussion. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I find most of what he said completely incoherent. He's basically saying that you're a Catholic, but you don't agree with loads of stuff the Catholic Church says, and you reserve to yourself the right to behave differently from what the Catholic Church teaches. Well, I'll put it to you then. That is not what a practicing Catholic is. Catholicism has a bunch of rules. If you don't like it, don't obey them, but don't pretend that you're somehow a practicing Catholic. And as for this thing about priests being forced to obey, they've taken vows of obedience, and that is part of their job. But if they don't want to obey,
I've got to go for
if they don't want to obey, they don't have to obey. If they don't want to be silenced, they don't have to be silenced.
I don't have to silence.
So I'm just going to say, I think... No, I'm going to finish that Mr. Butler has a completely mistaken idea of what being a Catholic is.
Excuse me, despite the disrespect you've shown to the chair here, I did say the last lady's question was the last one. I will allow your question to Brendan out of good grace. Brendan, and then Susan, if you'd like to respond to the actual question.
I want to answer the other lady about the UN. Because unfortunately for her, I've just found it. Oh, you haven't?
Well,
We'll let Brendan respond first.
Tony, is it? Yes, okay. There are the vast majority of Catholics. You are, I assume, in a minority because of, for example, just take, I don't want to bore people, but in the matter of artificial contraception, which is banned totally in the Catholic Church, the vast proportion of Catholics use artificial contraception in total defiance of their church and still remain Catholics. So therefore, conscience is the essence of the human person. And that is what Nazism, totalitarianism brought into this world, that people, whether church people or not, are do not use their conscience of right, their innate ability to differentiate between right and wrong. And when they find something wrong, they do something about it. And that's what we're doing. We're finding objectionable teachings in our Catholic Church. For example, that a homosexual has a disorder, intrinsic disorder. That is totally repugnant to a human person. And I find it totally objectionable, and I'd say it to the Pope in the morning, that it is a total disgrace for such a thing to be said about another person.
Sorry, Susan, your question was with regards, just to remind ourselves, was with regards to
the rights of the child.
Rights of the child.
I'm just going to read this. Let's to you. The United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, Article 7. This is what it says. I'll post it to you tomorrow if you don't agree. It says, children also have the right to know and, as far as possible, to be cared for by their parents. Now, if you disagree with that, I'll post it to you tomorrow.
Well, here we have what Tony has done and what Susan is doing now, which is, this is a language game that we're playing here. And whenever you see phrases like may or where possible in, insert the bigotry of your choice. Whatever is the dominant power system in place, and whichever particular group that they dislike, where possible or might or may, are the caveats that allow them to suggest that their particular form of dislike for a group or for an ethnicity or whatever it happens to be, then that is their get out of jail free card. So this right of a child, where possible, to be raised by its parents. In your interpretation, that means that letting gay and lesbian couples marry may open the floodgates to children who are not being raised by their biological parents. Well, as has been pointed out ad nauseum to both of you this evening, these children exist and they are disadvantaged because of the current state of the law. Now, both of you hold it to be a social good, that imbalance, that they are disadvantaged, the fact that the word family may not apply to them under law, that is what you were advocating. You were saying a no vote, the motion of tonight is a no vote would be good for Irish society.
I never said what you alleged, never once, not here nor anywhere, not in my life.
I am not putting these words into your mouth, I am saying what the implications of your position are.
Your implications of my position are your implications, not mine.
Do you or do you not advocate for a no?
What did you hear me say all night?
Do you advocate for a no vote? Yes.
What did you hear me say? Of course I do.
Correct. So the status quo is that any children born outside of wedlock are not protected by the constitutional definition of a family. You don't need to say that. That is the mere state of affairs. And gainsaying me it's not me putting words in your mouth. It is you now just being spectacularly obtuse.
If you'd like to let somebody else speak. I made it quite clear, I'm opposed to traditional marriage and relationships in so many ways, and I never once said I want to keep the status quo in everything. Never once.
A no vote is a vote to keep the status quo. That is what you were in public saying.
In one respect only, and I say in public and in private the same thing. In one respect, not in everything. And you're lumping everything together. By the way, there's a fundamental point you made here. The word may means absolutely nothing. Every law and constitution is riddled with words like may. For example, if I walk out here tonight and somebody attacks me, I have a right to defend myself. It is conditional. I have no right to attack somebody if I walk out. I have a right to use force to defend myself if attacked. The word may is absolutely essential in morality and in law, and to make a simplistic statement that the word may violates everything is absolutely incoherent ethically and logically.
I meant it about the words where possible. That's what I meant.
Sorry folks, we're going to have to leave it there. We're completely out of time. Yeah. Calm, rational. I would like to thank Susan, Max, Tom and Brendan for coming and speaking this evening. I was going to finish with a quote, but I'll go anyway. It says, it's Mahatma Gandhi, and he said, honest debate is often a good sign of progress. So I do hope we've made progress this evening. I know Michael just wants to say a few quick words, if that's okay.
Thanks. So thank you to everybody for coming here tonight. Thank you to Ashling for organising it. I'll just make a few quick points on behalf of Atheist Ireland. We're supporting a yes vote. Just a few factual things. The constitutional position, as has been mentioned, the constitutional position of the family is not about whether there are children or not. That the family is family with or without children. And if you're concerned about the rights of children, which I'm kind of disappointed that the no vote have successfully turned the debate into a debate about children. Well, it's not actually a debate about children. But if you want to make it a debate about children, Atheist Ireland is a member of the Children's Rights Alliance, and the Children's Rights Alliance, along with the ISPCC and Bernardo's, have come out in support of a yes vote and said that if you support the interests of children, on behalf of the organisations that actively work on an ongoing basis for the interests of children, those organisations are supporting a yes vote. A couple of quick points since we are Atheist Ireland on the theological issues that have been raised. In terms of Catholics, and speaking on behalf of Catholics, the most recent opinion polls with regards to Irish Roman Catholics is that 75% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in transubstantiation, which is one of the key distinctions between Catholicism and Protestantism. 50% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in hell, 15% don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and my personal favourite, 80% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe in God, which I would have thought would be a low for being a Roman Catholic. So in practical terms, the majority of Irish Roman Catholics display all of the attributes of Protestants. With regards to the Jesus quote, the Matthew 19, I mean, this obviously it isn't a theological debate. This issue should not be resolved on the basis of what somebody wrote down that they believe that somebody called Jesus once said 2,000 years ago. But what that person wrote down is actually a discussion in which Jesus is not talking about marriage, but he's talking about divorce. There's nothing that you'll find Jesus being quoted as in your Bible as opposing homosexuality. You'll find other people opposing it, but not Jesus. The final point that I want to make, which kind of touches on the common discrimination that has been faced by many groups in society, and if you look at as an example that I think encapsulates it is there's an opinion poll in America that's held very regularly by reputable polling companies, and one of the questions that they ask is would you vote for an otherwise well-qualified candidate for president nominated by your own party if they happen to be, and then there's a list of things, gay, female, black, atheist, etc. Now, atheists are currently at just about 50% in those polls. Half of Americans wouldn't vote for an otherwise well-qualified candidate nominated by their own party if they happened to be atheist. Now, the significance of that 50% mark is that is where gay candidates were in the 1980s, around the time of the AIDS scares and epidemics. It's where black candidates were in the 60s at the height of the civil rights movement, and it's where female candidates were in the 40s when women were supposed to be taking men's jobs during and after the war. So all of those graphs have been shifting upwards to the extent that it is now less acceptable to discriminate against women and black candidates and female candidates in America. Atheists are still kind of behind the curve, but all of all of the trends are moving in the right direction. All the trends are moving towards, in various waves, people recognising that what was once seen as an acceptable form of discrimination is gradually becoming less acceptable. And I'm really pleased to see that in Ireland, those of us who have been around long enough to have been through previous campaigns on issues, that it is now, it's extraordinary to think about it, it is now pretty much unacceptable to openly discriminate against gay people. Pretty much unacceptable to the extent that people who are opposing gay marriage have to bring in distractions like children and surrogacy because they don't feel comfortable in a way that they would have. So I'm not talking about specific people here, but that people generally don't feel comfortable in the way they would have 20, 30 years ago in openly being discriminatory against gay people. So that's a marvellous step forward. I do think it's really important, though, obviously, that we get the vote out on the day, and that's the big task, because the big difference in winning or losing referendums is not the strength of the argument, but who actually physically comes out on the day. So listen, thanks to everyone for coming here, and thanks to Ashling for organising, and thanks to our 4 speakers, and good night.